So this is kind of an interesting story. I was going to say fun, but it's kind of more sad than it is fun. It's measuring our rage
We're angry.
index. We
And
are.
not just you and I, Canadians are
Yeah, I
angry.
didn't mean just you and I. You and I are usually not angry,
Well,
but
sometimes mildly
in
irritated.
this particular case, look, if you think social media, and we said this before, it's kind of a rage machine, right? It's
Absolutely.
piling on and piling on and piling on. So this company decided, hey, let's try to kind of quantify this if we can. They're called Pollara Strategic Insights. Dan Arnold, who's their chief strategy officer, is on the line. What was the thinking behind starting a rage index, and how does this sort of play out month to month?
Yeah, so this is something we're going to be tracking going forward every month to see how it changes over time as Canadians get grumpier or more pleasant in their demeanor. The reason we started it up is that, at the start of the summer, I think there was a sense out there this was going to be a fun, exciting summer. We're coming out of COVID, restrictions are being lifted, everyone's going to be in a good mood. But myself and my colleagues at Pollara, every time we're at a barbecue this summer, I kind of felt like people were complaining about the cost of bacon or airport delays or passport renewal problems, and it definitely seemed like there was a bit of a grumpiness across the land. So we set out to try to quantify it, figure out what are the big sources of anger right now in the country, and how widespread is it.
It's interesting, isn't it, that we didn't get that moment of like release and euphoria, the roaring 20s that we were expecting. Instead, we've been left with this sort of grumpy bitterness. So aside from the price of bacon, Dan, what are Canadians really mad about?
Well, I mean, that's basically number one in the sense that inflation came up at the top of the list, not surprisingly, since that's something that impacts everybody. You had 83% of Canadians, or at least annoyed or very angry about the rate of inflation. Gas prices, which are obviously connected to that, are right back up there, close to that. But you see other things too. You've got the majority of people that are still upset about the trucker convoy, even 6 months later. Airport delays, over half of people are upset about. The housing market, over half of Canadians are upset about. So, lots of different issues that are still getting people a little bit worked up here.
So I know you had 2,000 people in the survey. I was curious as you're running through some of the reasons being given here for what people are angry about. Is it an open-ended question when you ask someone, what are you angry about? Or do you have to provide categories? How did it work?
We gave them 12 different things
Okay.
to rate their level of anger on. Six of them we're going to ask every month, which includes federal government, provincial government, the economy, stories in the news, changes that are happening in Canada. So there are things that are always something you can ask about, and people will always tell you why they're angry about the government, no matter when you asked it 100 years ago or 100 years in the future. So those are
Yeah.
kind of evergreen sources of anger. And then we also tested on a few things that are a bit more topical, issues like the passport renewals and airport delays. And those are things we'll be swapping out month over month. Just since putting this poll out, I've had a flood of people sending suggestions for, you should ask about telecom companies and bank fees. And there's no shortage of suggestions out there from Canadians
Oh, I
eager to
bet.
tell us things that they're angry about. So I don't think we'll be at a loss for coming up with questions for the next update.
I'm looking at the chart, and Aaron and I earlier, when we both took a quick glimpse at it, we were like, holy moly, there is an awful lot of red on there. So, and various degrees of red, but the dark red being angry, and then the next one being annoyed or moderately angry. And there's hardly any green, which is very happy. Dan, in starting this rage index, were you surprised at all that it was that intense, the level of anger?
Yeah, to some extent, 'cause I think there's a perception out there that Canadians are generally pretty happily demeanored people, very polite. We keep our anger on the ice and not elsewhere. But it's certainly going through it. It certainly seems like we are in a moment right now where the public is quite, at the very least, frustrated, if not intense rage. But even then, we saw on the weekend, in Alberta, the deputy prime minister being yelled at. There are these moments that have been popping up increasingly where you see these visceral moments of rage, and I think there is a risk that we do wind up, like other countries, where this becomes more and more pronounced over time, which is again why we want to kind of measure that intensity over time to see if it moves from frustration into that very angry category. That's a warning sign that we could be in for more of these moments that obviously we want to avoid.
So I get the part about governments and the economy, and yes, those will always be, talked about, and they'll be kind of high up on that rage meter, if you will. But I'm looking at the top two here, and certainly the top one, which comes in at 47%. So this is highest, right, in your scale on annoyed or moderately angry. and it's the latest stories in the news. And I'm trying to understand, what does that mean exactly?
Well, I think it's kind of a reflection that the types of things that are being covered on newscasts are not firemen rescuing puppies from trees. It
Mm-hmm.
is a lot of these other stories around inflation and delays, and I think the public at least has the perception right now that when they watch the news, there's nothing but bad news, which I guess is there's a war going on, and we're kind of still in a global pandemic or barely coming out of it. So it is true there's a lot of bad news out there, and I think that is clearly having an impact on people because it's it's a reminder almost every day about some of the bad stuff that's happening out there, which is just fueling the anger that already exists.
Yeah, and as far as the second category goes, which is next after latest stories in the news, types of changes happening in Canada. Again, I mean, that seems kind of
Yeah, what does
vague, but
that
I guess that
mean?
refers to the same kind of thing, right? The fact that so much stuff is happening now. You refer to the Freedom Convoy, those sorts of issues.
Yeah, I think it's kind of up for people to interpret it however they want to interpret it. I think that could be partly people who are upset with decisions that governments are making. It could be people who are upset with just change in general. Things aren't as good as they were in the old days. That sort of sentiment as
Yeah.
well too. But that is one that we do see. Especially among, I would say, kind of middle-aged Canadians tending to be the most upset about that at the moment right there. So, that's something that, could have many different sources, but clearly is something that people don't feel great about the direction the country is heading in.
Perfect.
I wonder too, Dan, what do you ultimately hope comes of this rage index? Like, sure, it's great for people to vent. It's great for the anger to be acknowledged. And there's even a certain amount of camaraderie, I would say, looking at this and being like, okay, a whole bunch of people are grumpy about a whole bunch of things right now. But is the hope that somehow, I don't know, on some governmental level, this might have some change come about? Or what's the hope here?
Yeah, I think that the hope this would be, at least a bit of help for decision makers and leaders in the country to stay in touch with what people are feeling and how their citizens are feeling. Because I think governments that stay in touch with how citizens are feeling tend to make better decisions because they're responding to the things that people want them to respond to. So, hopefully this provides a bit of a window into the minds of Canadians and what they want to see changed and improved. And obviously, not all these things can be fixed overnight. Even in the highest offices in the land, solving inflation is not something that people can necessarily do overnight. But at least I think it gives a sense of what people are feeling out there. And it's something we want to measure going forward too when it comes to that intensity level there. Being frustrated is one thing, but if those dark red bars, people who are very angry, start getting
Mm-hmm.
bigger and bigger and bigger, I mean, that's a bit of a warning sign that we could be drifting into an area where the risk of violence and other outbursts becomes more pronounced. We do want to keep tabs kind of on the intensity of that anger out there, and hopefully it's a bit of a warning sign for when things start to tip more towards a more danger zone.
I got to say, the one thing I thought might be really interesting, and I'm maybe you've come up with this already, is it's one thing to have these results and look at it and go, okay, here's where Canadians are. How do we compare with other places around the
Mm-hmm.
world, right, that have these same sorts of questions? That'd be fascinating to discover, whether it's in governments, the economy, whatever else. Is someone else doing this, or is that a consideration?
Yeah, that's something we might want to look at because I know again that Canadians love to compare ourselves to the U.S. And it certainly seems like there's a lot of anger there. So it would be good to get a read on that. I actually have seen some polling. There was a pollster in the U.S. that actually asked, do you think that there's a risk that the country is going to descend into civil war in the next 10 years? I don't think we're quite at the point where we want to ask questions like that here. Hopefully not, and hopefully we don't get to that point. But I do think, I think the international comparison would be helpful as a bit of a benchmark there. I do get the sense this is a general malaise that seems to be impacting a lot of countries coming out of COVID. There was that kind of we're all in this together mentality in most countries and a bit of a rallying behind the flag. We're going to get through this together. But now that we're moving a bit out of that, it feels like a lot of people have sort of moved back to the way it was before, and all this frustration that maybe has built up over 2 years is starting to come out in different areas. So it certainly seems like something that we're seeing in a lot of other countries, and would be interesting for sure to explore
Even
that comparison.
even provincially, I bet there's a huge disparity from coast to coast in Canada what Canadians are most angry about. So that'd be interesting to see too. Good stuff. Thank you.
Got a lot of work to do, Dan.
Yeah,
There you
we're
go.
keeping you busy, Dan.
We're happy to help. Dan Arnold, Chief Strategy Officer with Pollara Strategic Insights.